Eleanor Vance felt like a ghost in her own apartment, a cavernous space of glass and steel perched high above Chicago, where the city lights along Lake Michigan sprawled out like a field of fallen stars. But tonight wasn't about the skyline. It was about
Daddy.
Theo, her sharp, creative 7-year-old who had spent the entire afternoon constructing a magnificent skyscraper out of Legos he was dying to show his father. She'd arranged a simple, perfect birthday for him, with his favorite deep dish pizza warming in the oven and a cake meticulously shaped like the Hancock Tower waiting on the marble island. As Theo extinguished his 7 candles with a single mighty breath, Eleanor felt a fleeting moment of calm, wishing she could protect him from the letdown she knew was inevitable. "Mom, is Dad's site inspection almost over?" Theo asked, his eyes fixed on the cake. Eleanor's smile felt as fragile as spun sugar. "I'm sure it is, sweetie. It's an unavoidable delay." Unavoidable. That was the word Julian had used in his text hours ago. A cold, final term that offered no warmth, no regret, no apology, and certainly no acknowledgement that his only son was turning 7. Eleanor swallowed the bitter taste of being a secondary concern. "Go ahead," she urged gently. "You get the first piece." Theo's face lit up. One wish, a flawless sliver of childhood happiness. As the smoke from the candles faded, Theo asked for help on his school project about Chicago architecture. Eleanor opened her laptop and a sponsored article from a design magazine caught her eye. An exclusive first look at Julian Vance's secret passion project. Her curiosity piqued. She clicked the link, and the oxygen fled her lungs. There was a photo of a woman, a stranger, wearing a stunningly unique Art Deco brooch. The exact one Eleanor had found in an antique shop, the one she'd begged for as a push present. But it wasn't the brooch that made her world tilt. It was the caption under a photo of Julian and the woman, heads bent intimately over a model. Julian Vance with his muse, Isabella Rossi. The ambient hum of the city outside dissolved into a roar inside her head. Her fingers trembled as she quickly searched for Isabella Rossi and Vance Development. The results were a digital avalanche, industry awards, glossy magazine spreads, and a profile on Julian and his firm's visionary lead architect, Isabella Rossi. Theo padded over, drawn by her sudden stillness. "Mom, isn't that the lady who helped me build the big model at the office holiday party?" Eleanor's throat tightened as she stared at a picture of Julian and Isabella at a charity ball, his hand resting on the small of her back, his smile more relaxed and joyful than any he'd aimed at her in years. In that one gut-wrenching instant, the entire foundation of her life crumbled. Eleanor Vance had never imagined herself as the type of wife who would need to investigate her husband's life. For most of their marriage, she had operated on a bedrock of unwavering trust, certain their partnership was strong enough to withstand the temptations that shadowed Julian's ruthless ascent in Chicago's real estate world. It was a world she had helped shape, a world where she was his aesthetic compass before she shelved her own celebrated career as an art curator to raise Theo and manage their beautiful, sterile home. But tonight, this wasn't about trust. It was Theo's 7th birthday, and Julian's absence was no longer a matter of logistics. It was a deliberate decision she could no longer afford to misinterpret. She thought of all the benefit dinners she'd sat through alone, manufacturing a polite smile for acquaintances, while explaining he was closing a landmark deal. She thought of the trips to Italy that were repeatedly postponed for last-minute zoning hearings. She thought of telling Theo just last week, "Daddy is building a whole new skyline for us, my love." Theo had just nodded, his young face filled with a sober acceptance that shattered her heart. In that moment, Eleanor knew the charade had to end for both of them. She realized this article wasn't a careless slip-up. It was a calculated move. His only mistake was assuming she was too lost in her domestic bubble to ever see it. Eleanor clutched the laptop, her knuckles pale. She felt like an intruder in her own home, surrounded by designer furniture and sprawling canvases that Isabella's architectural vision had probably influenced. When she found a photo of Isabella at a groundbreaking ceremony, wearing a pair of diamond earrings Julian had brushed off as an investment piece for the company, every seed of doubt she'd ever suppressed bloomed into icy, unshakable fact. "This is for us," he'd once said, gesturing at the glittering city from their window. "Everything I build is for us." He had conveniently failed to define who us included. He had failed to mention that while she was coordinating parent-teacher conferences, he was acquiring antique jewelry for his mistress. He had failed to mention that he was meticulously constructing a parallel life, one where she and their son were merely part of the original structure, slated for demolition. For a brief second, as she gazed at the distant lights across the dark water of Lake Michigan, she allowed herself to hope this was all a terrible dream. She had no inkling that the reality was exponentially more destructive than she could ever imagine. There was a time when Julian Vance was not a stranger in his own home. Before the endless blueprints, before the hushed phone calls taken out on the terrace, before emotional distance became their default setting, he was the man Eleanor had designed her entire world around. In the early days, when his development firm was just a cramped office above a diner, Julian would bring her coffee in bed, and they would debate design philosophies for hours. He used to hoist Theo onto his shoulders in Lincoln Park, pretending they were giants who owned the city. He used to whisper, "Eleanor, you are the cornerstone. Everything else is just built around you." And Eleanor had poured her whole being into that foundation. But as his portfolio of properties expanded, his capacity for genuine connection seemed to contract. It began with minor cracks in the facade, a forgotten anniversary, a condescending tone when she discussed her charity work, a new obsession with his own legacy. Then came the secrecy, the way his laptop would snap shut the moment she walked into his study. Eleanor had attempted to explain away the changes, convincing herself he was buckling under immense pressure, that being a top developer was a lonely pursuit. But deep down, she felt herself being methodically zoned out of his life's master plan. He started to find fault with her choices. The uninspired artist friends she maintained, her disinterest in charming a city alderman, her supposed inability to comprehend the scale of his ambition. And Eleanor, pregnant with their second child, silently weathered every single critique, the way a woman who feels her territory shrinking often does, until she could hardly recall the feeling of being his partner. What stung more than the neglect was his mastery of gaslighting. Julian could make his dereliction of duty feel like her personal failing. If she admitted to feeling isolated, he would counter, "You need a new project, Eleanor. Find a gallery to work with." If she mentioned that Theo missed him, he would release a long, beleaguered sigh. "Do you have any concept of what it costs to maintain this life for you?" But the true cost was far simpler, colder, and was glowing back at her from the laptop screen. Julian wasn't just working, he was building an exit strategy. He wasn't just detached. He had already liquidated his emotional investment in their family. As she discovered a video of him and Isabella speaking on a design panel, their rapport easy and sparkling with intimacy, Eleanor felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not sorrow, not even fury, but a terrifying, diamond-hard clarity. Tonight, his carefully engineered reality had suffered a catastrophic structural failure. Theo Vance had always seen his father as a great king, a man who built glass castles that touched the clouds. At 7 years old, he believed that every postponed family dinner was due to a critical permit approval, that every hurried kiss goodbye was just a king departing for his kingdom, and that his dad, no matter how powerful, loved him more than any blueprint he'd ever signed. Eleanor wished, with every cell in her body, that she could maintain that beautiful illusion. That very morning, Theo had woken her by placing his newest creation on her pillow, a crayon drawing of their family standing atop a skyscraper that dwarfed all others. "Mom, do you think Dad will build this one for us?" he had whispered, his voice thick with sleep and utter devotion. "I'm sure he'll say it's the best design in the whole world, sweet boy," Eleanor had lied. His backpack was filled with his most important treasures to present to his dad: a rare book on Roman architecture, a photo of them from a family day at the Architecture Center, and the new biography of Frank Lloyd Wright he hoped his dad would read with him. At breakfast, Theo had laid out the evening's agenda with precision. "After cake, Dad and I are going to finish our Lego Tower bridge." She didn't have the courage to tell him Julian had already sent his regrets from a sudden investor dinner on the Gold Coast. She couldn't bring herself to be the one to bulldoze her son's happiness. "That sounds like the most incredible plan in the history of plans," was all she could say, knowing the words were a complete fabrication. Throughout the day, Theo was a taut wire of pure excitement. He even used the house tablet to send her a message, the subject line reading, "Dad home time?" and the body containing only a long string of skyscraper emojis. The second he got home, he set a place for Leo at the dining table, carefully folding the linen napkin into the shape of a seaplane. The sprawling waterfront condo, the stunning view of the Puget Sound, the gourmet custom cake, none of it meant anything to him next to that single empty chair. "Mama, maybe Dad's ferry got stuck in the fog," he suggested, his voice shrinking with each word. Elena wished she could stop time right there, to keep him safe in that flawless, hopeful moment forever. But when her phone buzzed with the notification and Leo saw all the light drain from her face, he knew. He couldn't read the screen, but he saw the change in her, as if a switch had been flipped, plunging her into darkness. His little shoulders drooped, his curious eyes suddenly filled with a question he was too scared to ask. "Mama?" His voice was a fragile wisp of sound, but it held the weight of the world. It was the sound of a child feeling the solid ground beneath him turn to sand. Tonight, she wasn't just discovering her husband's affair. She was witnessing her son absorb the devastating truth that sometimes a father's love isn't enough to bring him home. Julian Vance hadn't merely missed Leo's birthday. He had traded it, as if his own son was nothing more than a bargaining chip for a different life. The moment that terrible truth first took root was hours before the notification, when her phone lit up with a text she should have recognized as the lie it was. Emergency funding call. Stuck in Vancouver overnight. Meeting with investors first thing. Not, "Give my little man the biggest hug for me." Not, "Tell Leo I can't wait to celebrate with him." Just cold logistics. Elena had stared at the message, her thumb frozen over the screen. She typed and deleted 3 replies before finally sending nothing at all. There was no other way to interpret it. Julian had made his choice devastatingly clear. She clutched the phone, her breathing ragged. She had promised Leo a perfect day, a day where he was the sun in his father's sky. When Leo had asked, "Is Daddy coming home soon?" she had constructed a smile that felt like a painful crack in her composure. "Sweetheart, your dad is finalizing a new medicine that could save a lot of people. He's a hero to his company." It was a half-truth, a flimsy paper shield for a little boy who still saw his father as a superhero. But the reality of it washed over Elena in a cold, brutal tide. She thought of Leo lining up his new robotic rovers on Julian's pillow, a silent welcome for a father who wouldn't be there. She recalled the way Leo would stand at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the ferries cross the Sound long after she knew Julian's car wouldn't be driving up their street. Elena pushed aside the memory of Julian's promises, each one as fleeting as the mist on the water. By the time she and Leo sat down for cake in their vast minimalist condo, she had made a fragile peace with the familiar story that Julian was, once again, lost to his work. She had spent the last hour weaving gentle fictions for Leo, preparing herself to absorb the crushing weight of his disappointment. What she was not prepared for was the cruel, digital evidence waiting on her phone. She never imagined Julian would be so reckless as to leave such an obvious trail. She never imagined her son's birthday would be the setting for discovering his father's double life. She never imagined the universe would take this one evening she had fought so hard to salvage and burn it to ashes, because a broken family promise was one kind of hurt. But booking a private yacht for a romantic sunset cruise with another woman, on the very day Elena was desperately trying to protect their son from his absence, was a cruelty in a league of its own. This was not a scheduling error. This was not a work crisis. It was a calculated betrayal, staged with an astonishing level of arrogance, the kind of betrayal that doesn't just wound, it severs a vital connection. For Elena Vance, seeing that notification felt like stepping into an alternate reality she had only ever seen in movies. Birthday banners drooped in the living room, balloons tapped against the impossibly high ceilings, and half-eaten slices of cake sat abandoned on the quartz countertop. This was a world of private traditions and family joy, a place that now felt deeply contaminated. But her mission tonight wasn't to mourn. It was to give Leo a small piece of magic, a memory untainted by his father's betrayal. She had led him on a treasure hunt for his presence, past modern art installations, and toward the city's most exclusive toy shops. Elena was wearing a simple maternity sweater she'd bought on a day full of hope, held together now only by her sheer determination. But when she saw Leo's mouth fall open at the sight of a massive new robotics kit, a genuine warmth bloomed in her chest. "Mama, it's more complex than our car," Leo whispered, his small hands hovering just above the box. Elena managed a real smile. "Well then, tonight, you're the most important engineer in all of Washington State." She led him to the kitchen island, a sweet sanctuary in an ocean of intimidating silence. She cut him a huge slice of fudge cake, something rich and comforting. She wasn't sure his young palate was ready for the fancy catering she'd already canceled, and she was determined to let nothing spoil their special night. She filled a small glass with sparkling cider for him, calling him the birthday commander-in-chief. Leo puffed out his chest, beaming. For one brief, shimmering moment, everything was perfect, captured in a delicate, beautiful bubble. Elena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She glanced around the condo, taking in the scene, a framed patent for a groundbreaking algorithm on the bookshelf, a wall of windows overlooking the Seattle skyline. She didn't feel like she belonged in this world of ambition and power anymore, but being here for Leo made her feel anchored to it all the same. Leo kicked his feet under his chair. "Mama, do you think Dad will ever invent a robot that can fly?" Elena's heart seized. She hated lying to him, but the instinct to protect him was far more powerful. "I think he'd just want you to have fun building this one," she answered, her voice soft. Leo nodded, accepting the answer with the simple faith only a child has. The cake was a massive success. Leo's happy chatter filled their small corner, and Elena felt the tight knot in her shoulders finally begin to loosen. Maybe, just maybe, they had saved the night. But fragile things are not meant to last. Just as Leo scraped up his last bite of frosting, a notification chimed on her phone, displaying an alert from the Obsidian Reserve credit card app. The moment the merchant's name registered, Elena felt a cold dread crawl up her spine, a primal warning that a catastrophe was unfolding before her mind could even comprehend it. She looked at the phone, expecting to see a hotel booking for his business trip or a charge for lab supplies. Instead, reality landed its most vicious blow. Julian Vance was the star of an existence from which they had been completely erased. He wasn't tired, overworked, or reviewing data, as he'd claimed in his text only hours before. According to the alert, he was indulging in a sunset vows package, complete with a private chef and a champagne tour. But it wasn't the lavish expense alone that made Elena's world stop turning. It was the other name in the payment memo, Sienna Monroe, a venture capitalist so chic and formidable it was almost a cliché. Her name was there in crisp, digital print, linked to an arm that Elena still considered her own. The charter was for that very night, a detail of public intimacy that felt like a physical assault. In that instant, the ambient sound of the condo, the hum of the city, the distant sound of a ferry horn, Leo's soft breathing, faded into a dull, rushing sound in Elena's ears. Her mind raced, desperately trying to construct a logical reason. A thank you for an investor? A corporate event? A terrible misunderstanding? But then she saw the description again. Sunset Vows Package. Leo saw her face a second later. His small hand froze, his fork clattering onto his plate. His happy expression dissolved, replaced by a storm of confusion. "Mama, are you okay?" he said, his voice a tiny, unsteady whisper. Elena forgot how to breathe. She stared at the screen, and in that moment, she could almost see Julian's confident mask disintegrating. She pictured his charm vanishing, his jaw tightening, his entire body going rigid if he knew he'd been caught. It was the look of a man cornered by a truth he could no longer outrun. She imagined Sienna Monroe, her perfect smile faltering as she realized her romantic evening was built on the ashes of a little boy's birthday. A flash of something, pure, unadulterated fury, shot through Elena. She rose to her feet, her hands feeling numb and disconnected from her body. Leo grabbed her sweater, his knuckles turning white, his eyes searching hers for an answer she did not have. With one click, the carefully managed world Julian built, on secrets, collided with the family he had tried to leave in the shadows. Elena didn't make a conscious choice to move. Her body took over, driven by a fierce maternal need to shield her son from the fallout of the explosion happening right in front of him. She locked her phone, the soft click echoing in the silent room. She turned to Leo and manufactured a smile that felt like shattered glass. Her voice was a raw whisper when she finally spoke, shaking not with weakness, but with the colossal weight of what she had just discovered. "Of course, sweetie. Mama's just very tired." She picked him up, holding him tight against her pregnant belly. "What do you say we go build that robot?" The sheer audacity of the lie stole the air from her own lungs. But for her son, she would hold her breath for as long as it took. "You said you were in a server-side emergency," she murmured, her voice a fragile thread of sound on the verge of snapping. "I brought Noah to see the big reveal because you promised the crisis would be over by now." Noah clutched her jacket, peering out from the folds of her coat. "Daddy," he whispered, his small voice full of confusion. "Why is Miss Isabel touching your face like that?" Arthur felt the air leave his lungs, his eyes darting around the packed auditorium as if seeking a fire exit. The low hum of chatter from the assembled journalists and venture capitalists started to fade. The tech bloggers, the investors, the San Francisco elite. They could all recognize the kind of personal implosion that would fuel industry gossip for years. Isabel pulled back, her smile becoming a thin, sharp line. "Arthur, we need to get on with the keynote," she said, her voice pitched just loud enough for Olivia to hear the clear dismissal in it. The cavernous space of the Moscone Center suddenly felt claustrophobic, as if the air was being sucked out of the room. Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs, but a cold, steely resolve began to crystallize within her. "Oh, don't let me interrupt," she said, her tone deceptively airy, but cutting through the tension like glass. "This is clearly your moment." Isabel's media-trained composure slipped, a flash of pure irritation in her eyes. "Arthur didn't mention you were coming off of bed rest," she remarked, her tone making Olivia's presence sound like an irresponsible transgression. A bitter, silent laugh almost escaped Olivia. "Your moment, your revolutionary new product. While I was at home, following my doctor's orders to the letter, trying to keep our daughter safe until she's born." Arthur, the celebrated tech CEO, flinched back as if he'd been slapped, his carefully curated public persona cracking wide open. "Olivia, this isn't the time or place." "But this is the stage you built, isn't it?" she retorted, her voice shaking but resolute. For the first time all night, Isabel Vance, his formidable chief operating officer, looked completely and utterly blindsided. She shifted away from Arthur, as if the fallout of his private life was a radioactive contaminant she could feel on her skin. Olivia felt Noah's small body trembling against her leg. In that moment, surrounded by giant video screens, standing at the epicenter of a catastrophic betrayal, with her son's world fracturing around him, a brutal clarity washed over Olivia Chen. It wasn't fury. Not yet. It was the quiet, definitive click of a deadbolt sliding into place. This was the end of nurturing Arthur's ambition and the beginning of fighting for her own survival. Just as her legs threatened to give way, a calm presence detached from a nearby group of investors. A distinguished older gentleman in a beautifully tailored suit began walking toward them, his expression a mix of quiet command and profound concern. Marcus Thorne. She hadn't seen him in person for years, not since her days running a nonprofit. Long before she married Arthur, he was a titan in the venture capital world, a man whose quiet nod of approval on a board carried more weight than 100 loud-mouthed angel investors. She remembered his sharp mind and his genuine kindness. She never imagined he would be here to witness the public demolition of her life. "Olivia," he said, his voice low but filled with undeniable worry. "Is everything all right over here?" Arthur stiffened next to Isabel, his media-friendly smile frozen in place. "We're fine, just a little misunderstanding." Marcus's gaze never left Olivia. His eyes softened with compassion as he saw little Noah hiding behind his mother's coat. Olivia tried to speak, but only a strangled, broken noise came out. I'm not sure." Marcus moved to stand beside her, creating a subtle, protective barrier. It wasn't an overt challenge, but his steady presence felt like a shield. Arthur let out a small, arrogant scoff. "This is a private family matter, Marcus." At last, Marcus met his gaze. "You made it the keynote address," he responded, his voice even but layered with a deep, cutting disappointment. "And your son is obviously terrified." Isabel, the other woman, shifted on her feet, impatient. She was not used to being a background player in someone else's messy drama. "Look, we're not trying to cause a scene." "No one is, Mr. Thorne," he replied, his tone gentle but firm. "But a child is in distress, and that has become the only thing that matters in this room right now." A storm of emotions crossed Arthur's face. Rage, humiliation, and a jolt of panic as he saw his primary backers watching the drama unfold. Noah tugged on Olivia's jacket. "Mommy, can we go home?" His small voice felt like a shard of ice in her heart. Marcus leaned in slightly. If you need to leave, he murmured, for her ears only. My driver is right outside. Arthur moved as if to block them, his temper finally igniting. She doesn't need your help. Olivia took a slow, deep breath, the kind you take right before you detonate your own life to save it. For the first time that night, she met Arthur's furious eyes, with a gaze that was steady and calm. Actually, I do, she said, and so does my son. A heavy silence descended upon the nearby guests as they realized Olivia was no longer standing there alone. Olivia barely remembered walking across the polished concrete floor toward the main exit. She was aware only of Noah's small, cool hand in her own, and the solid, dignified presence of Mr. Thorne a few feet behind them. He remained close enough to be a bulwark, but far enough away to give her a small island of dignity. Outside, the damp San Francisco fog rolled in from the bay, a cold dose of reality on her flushed cheeks. The city lights glittered against the dark sky, their reflections on the wet pavement as shattered as her world. Noah sniffled, wiping at his eyes with the cuff of his sweater. Mommy, did I do something wrong? Is that why Daddy told us to leave? The question was 1,000 times more painful than any public shame. Olivia knelt, cupping Noah's face in her hands. No, my sweet boy. You did nothing, absolutely nothing, wrong. This is not about you. But Daddy looked so mad, Noah whispered, and he was letting that lady hug him. Olivia's throat tightened. She wanted to build a fortress around his childhood that no adult failure could ever breach. But the wrecking ball had already crashed through the walls. Before she could find the words, Marcus crouched down beside them, his voice calm and steady. Noah, sometimes grown-ups get so focused on their big, important projects that they forget what's truly important. That is always their mistake, never yours. Noah looked up at him, absorbing the words with the grave intensity of a child trying to understand a deep hurt. Olivia looked at Marcus, truly saw him, and recognized a man of immense integrity and empathy. He had stepped directly into her personal inferno without hesitation, guided by nothing more than simple human decency. He couldn't know the history, but he immediately understood the harm. Thank you, she whispered, the words barely catching the air. You have nothing to thank me for, he replied softly. No one should have to face a storm like that alone. Before Olivia could respond, the large glass doors of the convention center slid open. Arthur strode out, his face a mask of cold fury, his hands clenched into tight fists. Olivia, we are going to discuss this, right now. Marcus rose to his full height, his gentle demeanor replaced by something solid and unyielding. Now is not the time, he said, his voice firm. Your son has seen enough for one night. Let them go home. Arthur's incensed gaze snapped to him. You have no right to get involved in my personal life. Olivia slowly stood, her exhaustion hardening into steel. You gave up that right tonight, she said quietly. When you put your affair on the main stage for the entire tech world to see. Arthur's mouth fell open, but no words came out, not while his son was watching him. Not with Marcus Thorne standing there like a pillar of moral authority he could not dismiss or intimidate, and for the first time in his life, the unstoppable tech visionary, Arthur Vance, looked as if he doubted the power he had always considered absolute. The morning after the product launch felt eerily quiet, as if the entire city were holding its breath. Their sleek Pacific Heights penthouse, which normally echoed with Noah's laughter, was completely still. He sat at the quartz island, drawing, while Olivia tried to pack his lunchbox. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely snap the lid shut. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Arthur and Isabel on that stage, saw Noah's heartbroken expression, and heard Arthur's furious text message from late last night, accusing her of deliberately sabotaging the launch. After dropping Noah at preschool, Olivia was driving aimlessly across the Golden Gate Bridge when a security notification buzzed on her phone. Banking alert. A wire transfer exceeding your authorized limit has been initiated. A cold dread filled her stomach. She pulled over at the next scenic viewpoint and opened her financial app. The breath was stolen from her lungs. Arthur had liquidated nearly their entire joint brokerage account, wiring the funds to an unfamiliar holding company and leaving a balance of just over $2,000. The public humiliation was an act of ego. This was a declaration of war. With trembling fingers, Olivia logged into their shared family server. And there it was, a cascade of hidden expenses, a deed for a waterfront condo in Sausalito, receipts from jewelers in Union Square, charges for chartered yachts in the Bay, bills for weekend trips to Monaco, all from the past year, all paid for from the accounts she thought they were building together. Olivia sat in her parked car on the edge of the continent, the truth crushing her like a physical force. Arthur wasn't just having an affair, he was funding an entirely separate life with the fortune she believed was for their family, for Noah's future, for their unborn daughter, for the life they were supposed to be creating together. As if on cue, a second alert appeared on her screen. A shipping notification from a fine art logistics firm was the first crack in the foundation. Clara had never authorized a shipment. Her stomach tightened as she clicked the link. The manifest detailed the transport of a priceless sculpture, a piece she had coveted for their private collection. But the destination wasn't their Soho loft. It was a penthouse apartment in Singapore. Arthur hadn't just been unfaithful, he had been secretly liquidating their shared assets to furnish a new world for his mistress. He had established an untraceable digital trust, systematically converting their stocks, bonds, and art into cryptocurrency. This wasn't a messy affair. This wasn't a midlife crisis. It was a calculated corporate-level exit strategy designed to leave her completely insolvent, a plan she had been too devoted to ever imagine. As she stared at her phone, one terrifying truth became clear. Arthur wasn't just cheating. He was actively coding an entirely new life without her, using their joint fortune as the source code. And Clara Sterling had just discovered the master file for her own deletion. Clara stood before the sleek, minimalist facade of Sterling Innovations, clutching a phone filled with screenshots of crypto wallet transactions and the deed to the Singapore property. She had no clear objective. Maybe she wanted a confession, an explanation, or just a flicker of the man she had married. What she desperately needed were answers, not for the sake of their marriage, but for the hope of her own survival. The lobby was a symphony of polished concrete and glowing data streams. Employees in smart, casual attire moved with a focused intensity that made her feel like an outdated piece of hardware in her own life. She clutched the phone tighter and walked to the executive elevator. By the time its doors whispered open onto the top floor, her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Arthur's assistant, a polished young man with an unnervingly calm smile, looked up. "May I help you?" "No," Clara said, her voice thin. "I'm his wife." A flash of panic crossed the assistant's face. "Let me just ping him to see if he's available." But Clara didn't wait. She strode past the desk, pushed open the heavy glass door to his corner office, and froze. Isabel was there, leaning over a holographic projection of a new user interface. She wasn't just observing, her hand was resting on his, their fingers intertwined as he gestured toward the glowing screen, murmuring something that made them both share a low, conspiratorial laugh. It was the laugh of a shared future, a laugh Clara hadn't been a part of in years. The sound that caught in her throat was not a sob or a scream, but a sharp, silent gasp. The sound of a system crashing. Arthur spun around. Clara, what in God's name are you doing here? Isabel removed her hand with the casual slowness of someone who belonged there, smoothing her silk blouse with a self-satisfied smile that chilled Clara to the bone. I thought you were installing the new exhibit at the gallery, Isabel commented, crossing her arms. Clara's hands were shaking as she held up her phone. The Singapore penthouse, the offshore crypto accounts. Arthur, what is all of this? Arthur's expression shifted from startled alarm to frustrated rage, before settling into a mask of cold, corporate detachment. You have no right to be hacking into my private cloud, he said, his voice sharp. That is a profound breach of our trust. Clara stared, her voice trembling. Our shared cloud? The inheritance from my grandfather that you promised to manage? This is a breach of my entire life. Arthur stood, straightening his jacket as if preparing for a product launch, not the demolition of his marriage. Look, Clara, I am future-proofing our assets. I cannot allow your emotional attachments to jeopardize a 9-figure venture, especially not in my office. Isabel perched on the corner of his enormous desk, a predatory light in her eyes. It's time for an upgrade, Clara. Sometimes you have to sunset the legacy software to make way for the next-gen platform. Then Arthur delivered the kill code. I've accepted an all-cash offer on the Soho loft. You have 30 days until the new owners take possession. The room began to spin, because in that moment, Arthur wasn't just ending their marriage. He was wiping the server, deleting every file of the life they had coded together. Clara Sterling has no memory of how she left Sterling Innovations. One moment, she was watching the man who promised her forever treat her like a redundant beta version. And the next, she was in a taxi, the digital deed to his Singapore penthouse glowing on her phone like a fatal system error. Her breath caught, her vision blurred, and the sheer magnitude of it all, the digital liquidation, the ice-cold betrayal, the absolute humiliation crashed down on her. She tried to take a breath, but it came out as a broken, strangled sound. Noah. The name was the one uncorrupted file in the chaos. Her son, her sweet boy, her only reason to reboot and fight the virus. Clara pressed her forehead against the cold taxi window and finally let the system fail. It was a violent, hacking grief, the kind that hollows you out when you discover the entire architecture of your life has been stolen and used to build a palace for someone else. When she finally walked through her front door, her face was swollen and a deep, physical ache had rooted itself in her chest. She saw Noah on the rug, carefully building a magnificent tower from magnetic tiles. His face lit up with a smile of pure, untainted pride. "Mommy, look! I built the tallest skyscraper." His innocent words felt like another stress fracture in her heart, but she would not collapse in front of him. She swallowed the lump in her throat, knelt beside him, and forced a smile that felt like a cheap forgery. "It's the most amazing skyscraper I have ever seen, my love." Later that night, long after Noah was asleep, Clara sat in the silent, dark loft, hit by a volley of automated alerts, confirming that her passwords for their shared banking platforms and cloud servers had all been changed. She stared at her phone, the screen a glaring monument to his treachery. It wasn't just the affair, it was the cold, algorithmic precision with which he had engineered her obsolescence. Then, a new calendar notification appeared, forwarded from his account, to Isabel. "Singapore launch finalized, my love. Our new OS is ready to go live." Clara's hand instinctively moved to her belly. She was pregnant. Arthur wasn't just cheating. He was executing a hostile takeover of her life, a swift, brutal system wipe. The man who had once coded a simple "I love you" app for her on their first anniversary was now drafting a global empire on the wreckage of their family. For a long, quiet moment, Clara sat there, the sounds of New York a distant hum. Then, a new process began to run in the background. It was tiny, A single line of code in the ashes, but it was there. It was not anger, and it was not grief. It was resolve. A voice deep inside her typed a new command. You are not a bug. You are a feature. It was not strength, not yet, but it was the source code for it. The next morning, Clara walked out of their Soho loft, a sharp autumn wind cutting through the city that had nothing to do with the weather. Sleep had been a series of corrupted files. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw glowing, holographic interfaces and champagne toasts, hearing Arthur's voice say, "Our new OS is ready to go live." She needed a plan. She needed an expert. While waiting for tea at a small, quiet cafe, a familiar voice called her name, Clara. She turned to find David Chen, a brilliant art investment analyst she used to work with, holding a coffee. He was dressed in a casual hoodie, not the sharp suit he wore at auctions, which made him seem more approachable, more human. What are you doing here?" she asked, suddenly conscious of the dark circles under her eyes. "This is my morning debugging session," he said with a warm smile. "But I saw your face just now. At the Frieze Art Fair last spring, you seemed preoccupied. I hoped you were okay." Her throat felt tight. It had been an eternity since someone had really seen past her carefully curated exterior. Clara tried to deflect. "I'm fine. Just a long week." But David's analytical eyes saw the truth. His gaze dropped to the phone she was clutching, the screen still showing a complex cryptocurrency transaction. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice soft. Clara paused, then, on a sheer, desperate impulse, she slid the phone across the table. David's brow furrowed as he swiped through the files, his jaw tightening with every new piece of the puzzle. When he looked up, his expression was grim. "Clara," he said, his tone now serious and sharp, "what Arthur is doing here isn't just a personal betrayal, systematically converting marital assets into anonymous crypto and moving them into an unregistered offshore digital trust. That's a textbook case of wire fraud." The word hung in the air, slicing through her despair. "Criminal. Not just cruel, but illegal." "I could never afford a lawyer who could take on sterling innovations," she whispered, the words tasting like defeat. But David shook his head. "That's not what you need. My sister is a lead investigator for the DOJ's cybercrime division. She doesn't prosecute divorces. She dismantles financial conspiracies." Clara could only stare at him, speechless. "Why would you do this for me?" David met her gaze, his sincerity a lifeline. "Because what he's doing to you, especially with a child and another on the way, is monstrous. Because your children deserve what is rightfully theirs, and because sometimes you see a masterpiece being stripped for parts by a greedy collector, and you have to fight to save it." For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the suffocating fog in Chloe's mind finally began to clear. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek, but this one was born of relief, not despair. It was a lifeline. Her brother, Liam, pushed her laptop back across the table, his voice solid and unwavering. "You are not facing this by yourself anymore, Chloe, and you are not going down. Not while my firm is still standing." Chloe Sterling had spent 5 years shelving her own career to help build the myth of Arthur Sterling, the venture capital visionary. But the day after Liam's promise, something foundational shifted deep within her. It wasn't a sudden implosion, but the careful, deliberate process of rebuilding from the inside out. It started in their home office, a space Arthur had converted into a monument to his various Disruptor of the Year trophies. Tucked away in a secure digital archive were her old bylines, research notes from a massive financial exposé she had written in her 20s, a passion Arthur had once patronizingly called A cute, but commercially useless crusade. That afternoon, she started opening the files. She pulled on a simple gray sweatshirt, tied her hair back, and began printing out the documents, covering the sterile glass of their dining table with the hard facts of her former life. When she caught her image in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the broken woman who had stumbled upon a damning file that morning was already gone. She didn't see the wife about to be erased from the life she had helped create. She saw the investigative journalist she used to be. A woman profoundly wounded, but nowhere near defeated. She canceled her daily yoga class and instead had her car service take her downtown to the sleek high-rise on California Street that housed her brother's law firm. Her hands trembled, but only slightly, as she announced herself at the minimalist reception desk. Her voice was barely audible when she began explaining everything to the lead litigator, Jessica Riley, but it gained strength with every sentence. She presented the printouts of the offshore account statements with a cool, systematic precision that felt both foreign and invigorating. When she was done, Jessica leaned back, a sharp, confident smile spreading across her face. "Don't you worry, Chloe. Men like your husband think they own the world because they can code a new reality. We're about to show him what a catastrophic system crash really looks like." Tears welled in Chloe's eyes, not from pain, but from the immense relief of finally having someone in her corner. The counteroffensive began almost immediately. Arthur's messages started to light up her phone. "You're misunderstanding the data. This is just aggressive asset allocation. Let's discuss this rationally." Chloe refused to engage. Instead, she took a screenshot of each patronizing text and uploaded it directly to Jessica's secure client portal. That evening, she recalled the passcode to his personal server in the study. On it were encrypted files detailing phantom investments, wire transfers to unlisted shell corporations, and the seed funding contracts for the tech startup that Arthur swore were fully divested. She downloaded everything, organized the data, and labeled each file with clinical accuracy. Later that night, sitting in the soft blue light of her laptop, she felt a gentle, unmistakable kick from inside her. It was a terrifying prospect. It was a project more immense than any investigation she had ever led. But it was life. It was the foundation for an entirely new future. And when she placed a hand over her stomach and whispered, "We're going to be okay," it wasn't just a hope. For the first time on this frightening, unknown path, she was beginning to believe it was a fact. While Chloe was quietly assembling the case for her own freedom, Arthur Sterling's carefully constructed universe began to show signs of critical failure. Soon those hairline fractures began to splinter with the shocking speed of a man losing the absolute control he had engineered into every aspect of his life. It started at his own venture capital firm. The day after Chloe discovered the files, Arthur strode into the Sand Hill Road offices of Sterling Ventures, expecting the usual deference and admiration his presence inspired. But the air was thick with an unfamiliar tension. His managing partner seemed to be deliberately avoiding eye contact. Junior partners were whispering in glass-walled conference rooms, and a sealed envelope from the Securities and Exchange Commission was sitting on his desk. It was a formal notice. "We have received a credible whistleblower report concerning violations of fiduciary duty and wire fraud. A full forensic audit of the fund's finances will commence immediately." A sudden chill went through Arthur. He knew exactly what this was about. The so-called angel investment in Izzy's startup. The trips to Singapore that were billed as market research. The massive consulting fees paid out to accounts that he secretly controlled. He slammed a fist on his polished desk. "This is a competitor trying to sabotage us," he seethed, but the firewall had already been breached. By 3 p.m., the firm's general counsel was in his office. You need to disclose everything, Arthur. Complete cooperation is your only option. The entire situation was spiraling beyond his influence. It became starkly clear when all three of his frantic calls to Izzy went directly to her voicemail. The woman he'd promised to make the next tech unicorn had ghosted him the second his own empire showed a flicker of weakness. He sent another text. "We need to talk. Now." The read notification popped up almost instantly, but the silence that followed was a deafening void. His hands clenched into tight fists. He was a man who was not accustomed to being shut out. At the same time, Chloe's total radio silence was a special kind of agony. There were no hysterical accusations. There were no tearful pleas. There was none of the emotional chaos he had braced himself for. She had simply gone offline. Her quiet withdrawal was more unnerving than any confrontation. Back in their sprawling, sterile Pacific Heights home, he tried calling her number one last time. It went straight to her recorded message. He stood in the minimalist living room he now despised, a tempest of rage and anxiety swirling inside him. His grip on the life he had so flawlessly engineered was slipping away. Then came the final humiliation. The Sterling Ventures executive card was declined when he tried to charter a private jet to Geneva, a desperate last-ditch attempt to hide assets before they were inevitably frozen. He glared at the "transaction failed" notification on his screen, a hot wave of pure fury washing over him. This wasn't how his narrative was supposed to play out. He was the one who wrote the code. He was the one who set the terms. Instead, in the span of just a few days, Arthur Sterling was facing the very kind of catastrophic failure he had inflicted on countless others, and Chloe had yet to send a single text. Isabella Flores had zero interest in ever meeting Chloe Sterling. In fact, she had spent the last 72 hours meticulously excising Arthur from her digital life, blocking his number, scrubbing his contact info, and archiving the relentless flood of texts filled with hollow promises. Izzy saw herself as a founder, a builder, not a piece of collateral damage in the spectacular implosion of some rich guy's marriage. The situation was undeniable. Arthur's life was a dumpster fire, and he was trying to pull her down into the ashes right along with him. So when Izzy arrived at the address for Chloe's brother's townhouse, she wasn't wearing her usual confident startup hoodie. She was wrapped in a thick blanket of apprehension. Chloe opened the door, her face a mask of exhaustion and disbelief at seeing the woman who had become the face of her life's complete unraveling. "What do you want, Isabella?" Chloe asked, her voice flat and cool, which was somehow more unnerving than anger. Izzy fumbled for the right words. "I'm not here to apologize. I'm here because you have to understand who you're really dealing with." She was talking about the parts of the story Arthur had conveniently edited out. Chloe didn't say a word, but she stepped back from the doorway, a silent invitation. Izzy took a deep, unsteady breath, the kind one takes before detonating a bomb. "Arthur told me your marriage was just for appearances. He said you were basically business partners, that you were emotionally distant, and that the baby, he implied the baby, might not even be his." She dropped her gaze to the polished concrete floor. "I chose to believe the lie." Chloe's grip tightened on the door frame, her knuckles turning white. Izzy pushed forward, her voice shaking. "He promised me everything. $1 billion valuation, my face on magazine covers. But then I started noticing things that didn't add up. The sudden influx of anonymous seed money, the frantic talk about off-ledger partnerships. That's when I figured it out. He wasn't just investing his firm's money. He was funneling cash from his partner's capital accounts directly into my company." She finally looked up, meeting Chloe's eyes. "He was embezzling from them. Chloe felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her, but Izzy wasn't finished. He used your personal financial data to guarantee some of the funding rounds. He had digital copies of your signature. And that pitch competition in Dubai last month? She shook her head slowly. He was meeting with a fixer for one of his foreign investors, a man who made it very clear what the consequences would be if the fund didn't show a massive return, and fast. The lies weren't just about us. They were the entire foundation of his business. It was a Ponzi scheme, so much bigger than I ever knew. I walked away, Izzy said, her voice now a tight, strained whisper. But he keeps calling. He thinks I'll help him cover his tracks. He's convinced I will protect his reputation to save my own company. She looked at Chloe with raw, unflinching honesty. I am ready to give a deposition to your attorneys. Whatever they ask, I will tell them absolutely everything. Chloe never imagined she would find an ally in her husband's mistress. She never expected to learn the full scope of the truth, but she definitely didn't foresee Izzy's final words as she turned to go. Arthur Sterling is about to lose everything, and he knows you have the proof that will burn it all to the ground. The law firm's conference room was all glass and chrome, cold and impersonal. Clara walked in, one hand resting on the gentle curve of her belly, the other gripping a tablet her sister Olivia had loaded with encrypted files. The view of the San Francisco Bay was stunning, but it offered no comfort. This was not a negotiation. It wasn't a public trial, not yet. This was the opening salvo, freezing assets, establishing custody, and drawing battle lines. Marcus was already seated, his posture ramrod straight, in a bespoke blazer that probably cost more than her first car. He stared intently at the cityscape behind her head. His lawyer, a notorious figure in Silicon Valley, known for gutting founders, murmured something to him as Clara approached. But it wasn't Clara's arrival that made Marcus's knuckles tighten on his water glass. It was her sister, Olivia Hayes, one of the sharpest forensic accountants in the Bay Area, who followed her in. Olivia didn't sit. She connected her laptop to the room's main screen with a quiet, deliberate click. She radiated an air of unshakable certainty that made Marcus's confident smirk vanish. The meeting began. Marcus's lawyer spun a tale of a brilliant innovator, a tech visionary, buckling under the strain of an emotionally distant marriage. Then Olivia began her presentation. The senior partner adjusted his tie. Clara, your representative, has provided a digital forensic analysis of significant, undeclared cryptocurrency transfers. It appears Mr. Thorne created a ghost wallet, linked to a shell corporation, registered in Delaware, to siphon funds from marital accounts for the purchase of a luxury loft in Soma. The air in the room became thin, heavy. Marcus's face was a mask of controlled rage. At that moment, the screen flickered to life. The firm's paralegal patched in Isabella Rossi via a secure video link. Marcus Thorne's color drained away. Isabella's face filled the 80-inch monitor, her voice crisp and even. I am giving this statement voluntarily. Marcus assured me his divorce was amicable and nearly complete. He used cryptocurrency, which I now understand was derived from shared marital assets, to acquire a penthouse at the Lumina. I was present when he used voice-mimicking software to bypass a verbal authorization security check on a wire transfer. One of the junior associates on Marcus's team let out a nearly silent gasp. Marcus's lead counsel looked like he had been physically struck. Marcus finally lost his composure. Isabella, what in God's name are you doing? But Isabella's eyes on the screen were locked on Clara. I'm setting the record straight. The partner listened, his pen gliding across a notepad. Mr. Thorne, this sworn testimony alleges multiple federal offenses, including wire fraud and conspiracy to commit money laundering. Clara let out a shaky breath she hadn't known she was holding. It wasn't triumph, it was oxygen. The lawyer looked directly at her. Mrs. Thorne, pending a full audit of your estate, you are awarded sole use of the Pacific Heights residence. A temporary injunction is now in effect, freezing all of Mr. Thorne's personal and corporate assets, including his stock options, immediately. Marcus shot out of his chair. This is a fabrication. It's a conspiracy. They planned this together. But his words were just static. In that room, the blockchain was more credible than his blustering, and the meticulous unraveling of his tech empire had just begun. Clara Thorne didn't celebrate the moment with champagne. She celebrated it with the first easy, complete breath she'd taken in what felt like a lifetime, standing in the middle of Golden Gate Park. After the meeting, she picked up her son Sam from his preschool and drove straight there. The city skyline looked distant and strangely peaceful under the afternoon sun. Sam immediately launched an expedition to find the most interesting leaf in the Japanese tea garden, his laughter echoing like a tiny bell in the open air, as if his little world had just been given room to breathe again. For the first time since the nightmare began, Clara felt the solid ground under her feet. She found a bench, watching her son and letting the calm of the garden settle her rattled nerves. The crushing weight of the betrayal, the anxiety, and the shame began to soften like the fog rolling in from the bay. A voice she cherished broke her reverie. Figured I'd find my two favorite people hiding out here. She turned to see her sister, Olivia, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. She was an accountant, but she always knew the right formula for comfort. You're a lifesaver, Clara said, her voice cracking with emotion. I do my best, Olivia replied with a gentle smile, handing her a warm latte. Just wanted to check in. They sat in a shared quiet, watching Sam try to balance a fallen ginkgo leaf on his nose. Olivia laughed softly. He gets that determination from you, she said. He shouldn't have to need it for any of this, Clara answered, the familiar ache returning to her chest. But for once, she wasn't carrying it by herself. Clara, Olivia said, her tone softening, what you did in there today, that wasn't just some legal maneuver. That was you taking back your life. And Sam's, she added. That took a kind of courage you can't even see in yourself yet. She looked out at the manicured landscape, her eyes burning. I don't feel courageous. That's how you know you're being the most courageous, Olivia answered quietly. The silence that settled between them was a warm blanket against the cool San Francisco air. Sam came running over, his face glowing with pride. Mommy, Aunt Liv, look what I found! He held up a perfectly smooth gray stone. Then, without a moment's hesitation, he put his other small hand into Olivia's. A simple act of complete and utter trust. Clara's heart swelled, not with sorrow, but with a feeling she had nearly forgotten. Hope. As the sun began to sink toward the Golden Gate Bridge, a clear, powerful thought formed in her mind. She wasn't just trying to glue together the pieces of her old life. She was writing the first draft of a brand new one, a life where she was the editor-in-chief, a life where her children were the headline, a life where truth was the lead story, long after the lies had been retracted. And for the first time since she heard the smart speaker accidentally record his call, Clara Thorne could finally imagine a future that didn't feel like a correction buried on the back page. 6 months later, San Francisco was a different city for Clara Thorne. The hills were just as steep, but she no longer felt like she was climbing them alone. The digital audit had been an earthquake for Marcus. Clara's testimony, supported by Olivia's irrefutable blockchain analysis, built an inescapable case of fraud. The SEC launched a formal investigation. Marcus was forced out as CEO by his own board, and his primary venture capital backers filed a massive lawsuit against him. For a man whose entire identity was his status as a tech wunderkind, the public implosion was total. Tech blogs and financial news sites chronicled every detail of his downfall. Former colleagues would suddenly become fascinated by their phones if they saw him approaching on the street. In a final karmic twist, the very VC fund he had deceived was the one that won a summary judgment against him, leaving him in a financial black hole from which he would never recover. His empire was built on stolen code and lies, and he was left alone with the wreckage. During all this, Clara's world was quietly and wonderfully being rebuilt. She had given birth to a beautiful baby girl, Lily. Her new project, an investigative journalism podcast focused on corporate malfeasance in Silicon Valley, had become a breakout success. Sam was his cheerful, curious self again, his drawings filled with rockets and planets instead of dark, scribbled shadows. But the most profound change was within her. One evening, her sister Olivia invited her to a fundraising gala at the SFMOMA, the exact kind of tech society event she once would have loathed. This time she said yes without hesitation. She picked a stunning dress the color of the Pacific at dusk, a shade that seemed to reflect her own quiet strength. When she arrived, Olivia was waiting. She skipped the easy compliments about her dress or her hair. She just looked at her, her eyes full of a sister's deep admiration. "You look whole, Clara," was all she said. "I am," she replied, and the words felt as solid as the ground beneath her feet. They moved through the vibrant, crowded museum with a relaxed confidence, chatting and laughing. Sam and the baby were at home with their favorite sitter, who had sent a picture of them both sound asleep. Later, as they stood before a massive, thought-provoking installation, Olivia's voice grew more serious. "You know, Clara, I hated every second of watching you go through that. But I have never been prouder of the woman you are right now. Clara, I know it was hell, but you've managed to build something so real from all that digital wreckage. A family, a career, a true life. Whatever is next, you're ready for it." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, not of pain, but of release, of gratitude, and of the calm assurance that she had survived the storm and was now standing in the quiet, beautiful garden that grows in its wake. She squeezed her sister's arm. "I know," she whispered. All around them, the gallery lights cast a warm, promising glow, and with that, Clara Thorne stepped into her next chapter, grounded, strong, and finally, completely her own. And so, our story comes to an end. If you've stayed with me until this final moment, it's probably because some piece of this story spoke to a part of your own. Perhaps it mirrored your own journey of rebuilding, or maybe it touched upon a wound that is still mending. And that is perfectly fine, because life has a habit of testing our foundations when we feel most secure. But as the Stoics taught, the obstacle in the path becomes the path. And Clara's story is a powerful reminder of that enduring truth. You never need another person's validation to be complete. You grant that to yourself with every small act of courage. Healing is almost never a single, dramatic event. More often, it's the quiet rhythm of a new passion, the unwavering support of family, the sound of a child's unrestrained laughter, or the slow realization one morning that your hope has, at last, become louder than your fear. If this story resonated with you, I would be so grateful if you would like, share, and subscribe. It's not about feeding an algorithm, but about passing a beacon of hope to someone else who might be lost in the dark. Most of all, please remember that you deserve tranquility and have every right to a brand new chapter. This story is a complete work of fiction crafted purely for entertainment and to explore emotional themes. The characters, situations, and conversations, including all names, places, and deeds, are born from imagination and are not meant to reflect any real people or events. Any similarity to actual individuals or incidents is purely coincidental. Our purpose is to examine themes of healing, self-worth, and empowerment through storytelling, not to portray or cast judgment on any real person. We hope our audience sees that this tale was designed to uplift and bring comfort, acting as a source of strength for anyone facing their own private battles. We ask that you receive this story with care, keeping in mind it is a fictional piece with a heartfelt intention. Your support means the world to us as we aim to build a secure and positive community with you.